All right, so now this part I am going to keep because this is the 600th episode
Beep, beep, beep,
in
beep,
its
beep, beep.
entirety. Beep, 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 beep. Oh, look, Angela's already tearing up.
Hello and welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager, and yay, it's episode 600 here on Real Film Snobs. And joining me today is friend and longtime Real Film Snobs crew member and now co-host extraordinaire, Jason Aguayo. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks, Angela. Congratulations on 600.
Wow, 600. Yeah, we just keep going. We're like some of the members of Congress. No matter how old we get, we just keep going. We won't give up. I'll be
Until we
here.
keel over. Keel
Yeah,
over.
yeah. One of these days, I'll just flop over, and that will be the end of the show. So, for our 600th episode, we're going to be doing a special episode of She Directs, our segment where we look at female directors, female auteurs. And this is an idea that Jason came up with that we have been doing. This, well, I think our third one. Previously, we did Ida Lupino and Penny Marshall. And today, we're going to be looking at the films of an earlier filmmaker, Dorothy Arzner, and I'm really wanting Jason to actually introduce her because he is the historian here who has done the research and picked many of these directors, or I guess so far all of these directors. So, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about Dorothy?
Okay, well, I'm no expert certainly, but I can say that she was born in San Francisco, 1897. But her parents lived in LA and ran a place, a cafe next to a theater. And that theater had live productions, but also silent films. And so she became accustomed to kind of crossing paths with some of the stars of the day. So that became kind of a normal thing for her. Quick note, she went to Westlake School for Girls, so I'm going to send out a shout out to my friend Jenny Roberts, formerly Jenny Brown, who actually went to the same high school as Dorothy Eisner. We went to college together, and so that was kind of a funny thing to see in Dorothy's bio there. She went on to
That's
study
funny.
medicine, uh, and actually worked as part of an ambulance team during World War One. But medicine didn't seem to be the thing for her. She wanted to be able to heal people magically without having to do medicine and surgery and such. So she changed courses, and a girlfriend recommended that she go to Paramount and ask for a job, and which she did. And it was at a time, she comments that they were in need of workers. This was like during the Spanish flu pandemic, and you could get on at a studio without having a lot of experience. Well, she ended up in the script department, typing scripts initially, and then started editing. So I think this is one of the things that excites me about her is that, editing in the old days oftentimes fell to females, but I mean, it's so critical in putting the story together. Obviously, directing and other pieces are important too, but she ended up editing, cutting more than 50 films with Paramount before getting shots at directing. Um, I guess the first film I'll mention is Blood and Sand. This was a Rudolph Valentino film about bullfighting. And she was the editor on the film and ended up shooting as a director some of the sequences. And she used stock footage of bullfighting to put the scene together. And that saved the studio quite a bit of money. And so that was one of the feathers in her app as she moved up. But at some point, she got an offer from Columbia to jump ship so that she could direct. And so she was ready to leave Paramount, but uh, going back in to say goodbye, they scrambled to get her an opportunity to direct a film, and not a B film, but one of their better projects. So that ended up being Get Your Man. So that got her started in directing. Um, I guess I'll mention just a few others. That was a silent film with Clara Bow. And she did have several other films, the 10 Modern Commandments, Fashions for Women, and Cocktail. Those are all silent films that have been lost, so they are no longer available. The Get Your Man, I saw a version of it, but apparently there are a couple of reels missing, so it's not the full film. She did something called Charming Sinners in 1929, but actually isn't credited as the director. And I guess that brings us up to speed for our first film. Um, Happy to talk more about Dorothy Arzner as we go, but
Yeah.
interested to see where you're at on this director.
Well, and I will say, just for our viewers out there, you will have to hunt for some of her films. They're not the easiest to find. Criterion Channel for a while had a big collection of her stuff that they've taken down, unfortunately. And so a lot of these films you will have to find either through your local library or on maybe sometimes on Canopy if they come up. But also, I found a lot of these on YouTube in their full length version. So, which is not always the best picture quality, but it's not always terrible either. So our first film is one of those that's pretty difficult to film, The Wild Party from 1929. It's about an all-female college where Party Girl, played by Clara Bow, falls for her professor. And remember, this is 1929, so it was not considered frowned upon back then. Falls for her professor, played by Frederick March. And a couple of interesting things about this film. This was Clara Bow's first talkie. Clara Bow at the time was the biggest star in Hollywood, bar none. She was the biggest film star of the silent film era. For those who saw Damien Chazelle's excellent film Babylon, the Margot Robbie character is very loosely based on Clara Bow, who had a very difficult upbringing and then was someone who really struggled to make that transition from silence to talkies. It was Arzner's fifth film, as you mentioned, Jason, but it's her earliest surviving film in its entirety to be intact. Unfortunately, her four earlier films did not survive. What's great about this film, besides the awesome fashions, which I just have to mention, my husband was walking in a few times while I was watching this movie, and he was like, "Wow, these '20s outfits are outrageous." Is this great idea, this camaraderie with these college girls who all look older than college. Although I actually don't think Clara Bow was actually that old, but I just think people in the '20s just look older than college students do today. I'm partially it's just the film stock, right? But they have this great camaraderie where they're always kind of backing each other up, and yes, they're party girls and they're sexually wild, but they're also like when one of the guys at a party, one of my favorite scenes is there's a guy at this party that's harassing one of the girls. Clara Bow and her friends decide, oh, we're gonna get him, and then they play this prank on him where they take him on the dance floor and they start swirling him about until he's dizzy, and each girl takes turns until they basically kick him in the butt out of the house. And so I loved that sequence. There's a great, it's an interesting mix with Frederick March and his style of acting and Clara Bow. I wonder what you thought of that, Jason, because he is a much more film talky, type of actor in that he is a little bit more contained, more reserved in his acting style. And she is, again, from the silence, a very big, broad actor, loud. And it fits her character in a way, but it's also that style of acting they did. You can tell she's still acting like she did when she was in silent films a little bit, even though she's not in a silent film in this case.
Well,
So
yes,
curious what you thought.
I think, as you mentioned, the camaraderie of the women, and this is kind of a theme that starts to run through a lot of the Arzner films. That's these strong female roles that are looking out for each other, and the romantic relationship with men is kind of secondary. But yeah, and also Clara Bow, that making that transition to sound, there was some worry about her accent and how well her voice was going to translate to talkies. It ended up being fine, but there was some concern there. And just making one note about her comfort with trying to, work with microphones led Arzner to develop a microphone that she could hang on the end of a fishing pole. So this is credited as the first boom mic, rather
Oh,
than
really?
everybody crowded around a static mic. They were able to move around a little bit more.
Is that
And
because
yeah,
Clara Bow couldn't hit her shots? She was having trouble because she was
well,
used to
I
not
think it
having sound.
like you said, her style was much more boisterous. So the idea of kind of staying close to a microphone because these were big bulky things, back then,
Hmm.
that it made her uncomfortable. So that opened up the production a little bit to be able to move around with the sound.
Very impressive.
Um, Frederick March, he was actually in one of the Ida Lupino movies, and I was looking forward to seeing him here. And yeah, he's young and very kind of stoic and contained, which is sort of his character. Um, but we end up seeing him he did about 4 or 5 movies with Arzner, so they made a good connection, working well together. So yeah, it is interesting, the relationship, the idea that a student teacher, I think technically they say that they're going to get kicked out of school, and so they avoid, broadcasting that. But just the fact that it is an accepting thing on a personal level is a weird thing looking back on that age. But I really like the movie, and like you said, they were great outfits. I wonder if it was that costume party where Julian walked by, where they were doing the dance number through the party, and then they actually got kicked out by the head of the student body.
because of their risque outfits, but they
Right.
were so cool. I was like, these are so modern, I thought they were really cool looking. So,
Right. And
yeah,
and
no,
this one is more of a conventional story and has a kind of happy ending towards the end, but and I think it was a successful movie for Arzner, and so that led to more projects as
and
he moved forward.
and there's some great lines in the movie too. I can't remember exactly what he says, but there's some piece where, because one of the things about their relationship, this is the classic couple at odds. They kind of drive each other crazy, and he says to her at some point like, "You're a savage. I can't stand you." And then he like grabs her and kisses her passionately, and
Right.
then and then she says to her friends at some point when she's talking about the professor, like, "I can't stand that man. I hope I see him soon." And so
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
this like,
yeah.
yeah. So that was a lot
And
of
he
fun.
does have a great speech when they're looking down on the college, about the college and how what it took to get it up to have this school for women, and how she's not honoring that. It seems like a weird kind of bookend with the speech that we're going to have in her final movie later. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're fun, it does dive into complicated relationships and usually has a pretty significant message.
Yep. Yep. Great. Well, let's move on to our next one.
Okay, so just mentioning the movies that she did in the interim, Anybody's Woman, Paramount on Parade, which was more of kind of a show thing, Sarah and Son, and Behind the Makeup she wasn't credited on, but in 1931 she did Working Girls, and this has a couple of sisters, May and June, who come to New York, and they end up landing in a home for homeless girls. Um, they start looking for work, and May gets a job, and almost immediately her boss proposes to her. So this is another complex relationship that maybe would be frowned on in modern sensibilities. Um, she declines the offer and is fired. Um, and so this puts her in kind of a dour state. Her little bit more savvy sister is there to defend her. They end up getting other jobs, and May finds a high society fellow that she falls for and spends the night with. But then he starts to ignore her, and yeah, so again, they're complicated relationships. They end up back with the boss, and he ends up proposing again. They get engaged, but in the end, he falls for the other sister. So a lot of crazy stuff going on, dating, relationships, but core to it is the relationship between the two sisters who are basically opposites, and how they relate to the world, especially dating and marriage around them.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think when I was watching this movie, like, oh man, this is before you had any sort of civil rights for women. Like the fact that she shows up to the job, I mean, it's pretty soon after she starts, he proposes to her. And when she says no, he's like, okay, well, you're fired. I can't work with you then. I thought, whoa, this is
Mm-hmm.
so wrong. And so then she's out of a job, and she, I just thought this is crazy. But again, she's showing these struggles that women have in the workplace. And of course, there is the romance involved. It isn't as critical as we with a modern audience I would like to see of these men and their behavior, because one of the sisters does fall for this guy, but I think you have to remember this is 1931. This isn't 2023. This is
Different
literally
time.
yeah, almost 100 years ago. And so we with different standards, and still for the time, to show these two women who are on their own trying to make it, they're struggling to get by. They have to work for a living in order to survive. And then one of the gals, one of the sisters still has her standards. She's not willing to just marry just to, so that she doesn't have to work anymore. And so I liked that aspect of it.
Well, she does pal around with a trumpet player who seems to get the short end of the stick a lot of times. But yeah, not only navigating the uh, environment and having to work, but also the class stuff. The
Hmm.
May ends up, kind of getting involved with this guy who's more of a socialite. His engagements are announced in the paper. So it's a different
Right.
place than what she's used to.
And this one, I believe I saw it on Criterion Channel when it was showing on there. It's not on there anymore, so I think folks are gonna have to. I'm not sure where you saw this one, Jason, but I think this one is on YouTube, full movie. If you just type in the name of it and the year and say full movie, you'll be able to find some of these. It's really unfortunate. I really wish Criterion or some other, maybe Kino, would put out like a collection of Dorothy's work, because so many of them are so difficult to film. Only one of two of her films, one of which I own, Merrily We Go to Hell, is even available on Blu-ray, and that one is Criterion, but I wish they would put out a full box set of her work.
Yeah, that would be nice. Most of the ones I viewed weren't very good quality. They were on
Yeah,
YouTube or
exactly.
somewhere else. Yeah.
Okay.
So just wanting to move on through a couple of other films there. Honor Among Lovers, Merrily We Go to Hell, as you mentioned. I'd highly recommend Christopher Strong. That was 1933 with uh, Colin Clive and an early Katharine Hepburn. Nana, Craig's Wife, with Rosalind Russell, and a couple with Joan Crawford, The Bride Wore Red, and The Last of Mrs. Cheney. Um, Again, many of these have strong women at the center, and they're navigating non-traditional kind of relationships with men.
Yeah.
My
Especially Christopher
apologies.
Strong, I would say, with, Katharine Hepburn playing a female pilot who is having an affair with a married man. I mean, it's very ahead of its time.
Right, right. My apologies for my siren here. Um, but that brings us to 1940, Dance Girl Dance. And so this is the one that you often will see available. It's one of her more famous films, um, starring Maureen O'Hara and Lucille Ball in a early role in some comedy, but also some drama. So this is about two girls, Judy and Bubbles, who are dancers in Ohio. They end up going to New York, and Judy starts in working in with this school of ballet, and her a teacher arranged to meet with the guy that's running a professional ballet troupe. Unfortunately, the teacher is killed en route, and so Judy ends up crossing paths with the guy that they were supposed to meet, but she doesn't know who he is. In fact, he kind of comes onto her and she rebuffs him. Um, Separately, they end up um, doing an audition for a burlesque show, and most of the other dancers don't really impress this guy, but Bubbles does, and she gets hired on in the burlesque show, and soon changes her name to Tiger Lily and is the queen of burlesque, having this big show. And she ends up hiring Judy back kind of as the stooge in her show. She does this really prim and proper ballerina show that people kind of haze her for prior to Bubbles coming out and doing her regular show. So I don't know. This is a crazy story, differing views, a lot of again strong women, but what is the what am I trying to say? They kind of balance the artistic versus the commercial endeavors that they're engaging in. What did you think?
I love this film. It is one of her greatest films, I think, and it is one of the only ones that's easy to find. So it is available. If you just look at, many streaming services, it is available. Lucille Ball is terrific in this movie, as is Maureen O'Hara. Both are terrific. But if you think you know Lucille Ball from I Love Lucy, she's completely different type of character here. And there is a great scene where the audience is just putting down Maureen O'Hara. She's on stage, she's doing, and they're just ripping into her. And there's a scene of all these men like leering at her, and she just stares at them and just goes off. And it's considered, now this like very early feminist type of thing. Very interestingly, the movie was a huge critical and commercial flop when it first came out. New York Times Bosley Crowther, or as I like to call him, Mr. Crouchy, or Mr. Crotchety, because he hated almost everything. It seems like just totally said it was schlock. And now, you know, just goes to show, as an artist, don't always take at the time. It was ahead of its time. Now it's considered a feminist masterpiece, and it's on the National Registry of Important Films for America. It, many people now consider it a classic, and it's been revised. But when it came out, it lost RKO, the studio, tons of money. So it's really unfortunate because it actually is a really fine film. It's, even though most people consider it her best film, I actually think Merrily We Go to Hell is my favorite film of hers, but this one is um, quite good. It is an odd story, because you have this interesting thing with the dancers are, particularly Maureen, her character is classically trained. She wants to be a serious dancer. She ends up in this burlesque show by just because that's what she can do to make a living, basically. And it gets back to, again, to those class issues that I think we see throughout Arzner's films, where a lot of women are, like we saw in Working Girls, are just trying to make a living, which is not always what you see in older films about women, where they're often portrayed as housewives. You don't see a lot of housewives who are, in her films, or you see some, but not a lot. So,
I really, going back to the point of when she gets hired as the kind of stooge of the show. Yeah, the first time she goes out, it is just harsh. I mean, it's difficult to watch. And,
hmm
she runs off basically in tears until, they basically say, well, this is part of the show. They're supposed to uh,
jeer
uh,
at you, yeah,
jeer at
till
you, and
Tiger
then
Lily
they
comes out,
cheer
yeah.
at her. And yeah, and so that speech, she gets out there and um, just nails them to the wall about objectifying women and how they should be ashamed and would be ashamed if they when they go home to their wives. It's like they have to come to the show to behave so terribly.
Right, like, would you talk to your wives, mothers, sisters this way? She
Right,
kind of, and then all the men are kind of sitting there like, and then they're kind of like uncomfortable, like, well, I didn't come
right,
to be lectured at this
right,
event,
right,
so,
right. And
so
again,
yeah.
primary is the relationship between the women. Their relationship with men are sort of secondary to the story, and there isn't
hmm
necessarily that romantic off into the sunset, happily ever after kind of.
Yeah, the men are fairly forgettable in this movie, in my opinion. It's really in a lot of her movies, not all of them. I think Frederick March and Wild Party and some of the other ones, you see there's some good male characters, definitely, but sometimes they're less interesting, I think, and then under the next one we're going to talk about. I definitely think that's the case, where the men are less interesting than the female lead in some of her movies. So, but this is definitely one. If you haven't seen it, this is probably a good entree into Dorothy Arzner, in part because it's probably the one that has some of the best picture quality that you'll find.
Right, right.
Because some of these other ones you find on YouTube aren't necessarily the best. Although, I found like the Wild Party, there's different versions. There's one in particular I found that I tried different ones, and and it had pretty good quality, so you can find some decent ones on YouTube. And I think, in part because some of these are probably in the public domain, you can find them on the internet. So,
Definitely recommend. So
yeah.
that brings us to 1943.
Yes. And did she do anything in between Dance Girl Dance and our next one,
No,
Jason?
no.
No. So nothing. Okay.
And I think
Oh, I'm supposed to introduce this one. Yes. Sorry, I forgot. I was waiting for you. I was like, Jason, take it away. So our next film, this is one I was not that familiar with, and you really highly recommended this one, and I'm glad you did. It was hard as heck to find. 1943, First Comes Courage, with one of my favorite actresses of the classical period, Merle Oberon, who I love. Still to this day, played my favorite version of Kathy in Wuthering Heights. And Merle Oberon plays a member of the Norwegian resistance during World War II, who is engaged to a Nazi officer, because she's secretly, of course, a spy. But nobody in her town knows that, so they just think she's this, like, Nazi hoe, basically, who has turned her back on the Norwegian
right from
people,
the opening scene, they're just like sneering behind her back.
sneering at her as she walks down the street. And then secretly, she's actually a great patriot who is doing a great service for her country. And but the resistance starts to get word and suspect that the Nazis are onto her, and that her fiance is onto her. So they send in a daring. I guess he's supposed to be Norwegian, but he's coming from England because the English are like working with
Yeah,
the
he seems to
Norwegian
be British, but for
resistance.
some reason he knows the town really well in the area.
Well, and he's her ex-fiance or ex-boyfriend, and so they have a history. So they bring him in to kind of go in and make a big play and kill this Nazi officer and save her. So that's supposed to be the plot. In the meantime, lots of different kind of spy World War II things happen, where, there's lots of tension where, he's telling her things and you don't know whether he's telling her things because he does trust her or because he's trying to test her to find out whether some of these things he tells her show up to be true, and then he knows that she's the one who's been giving the secrets away. So there's a great tension with her and the actor who plays her fiance, the Nazi. Merle Oberon, though, is the focus of the movie. The male characters, particularly the guy, the hero, if you will, he's fairly forgettable in my perspective. Your eyes are on her in every scene, in part because she's really the one with a lot to lose here. She has to pretend she loves this guy who she absolutely loathes and does a pretty good job of it, and hang out with these Nazis all the time in her house. Meanwhile, she's just in total disgust of these folks, and she could be killed at any moment if she's discovered. And she plays that very well. And I thought this was a really interesting movie because we've seen that in more modern movies. There's been these versions of women who did work for resistance and did get together with the enemy in order to help. But this was 1943, the war was still going on when this
Yeah,
movie
still
came
during the
out.
war.
So yeah, so that to me it seemed really early to be telling this story.
Right. Yeah, no, I really like this movie. I watched it again this week. And what we don't see is how she convinced him that she loves him. That's kind of before the movie
They're
starts.
already a couple, yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right. But yeah, certainly the courage that she expresses, going through this. And as you said, there's bombings. The Allies are making these bombings, and he's trying to figure out where the leak is because he's told so few people until that towards the end, he only tells her. And then the fish factory in Alvin was bombed today, and he's like, right before they go into this Nazi state wedding. So that was what the impactful thing to me was the shot where she's weirdly dressed like Princess Leia and she's marching through these Nazis to get married, despite having been a spy. And then right after that, I think is the best scene in the movie when the two of them confront each other about, he says he knows that she was the spy and she just spits vitriol back at him. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's fabulous. And I didn't know much about Merle Oberon, but great in this movie, and I'm looking forward
Oh,
to seeing
such a
other films
terrific
of her.
actress. She was always cast because she is mixed race as exotic beauties, and so she could play, she would play all these different types of characters
But
in her
although that
features.
was
She's
hidden,
just great.
apparently, like her
Yeah,
background
no,
was
they don't know it until
masked.
now, but
Yeah.
now at the time she hid her background and of course changed her name like a lot of actresses did back then.
Quick
But she's
note,
just
so this
terrific in
is
this
the
show.
final film from Dorothy Arzner. She didn't do any second director units, so she directed all those battle scenes and everything, but she ended up getting sick with just a couple of weeks to go in the and she was ill for a long time and ended up leaving the industry after this. So she did go on to teach. Francis Ford Coppola was a student of hers at film school
Oh,
at some point in the 60s, but she did not make any more films for the rest
despite
of
living till 1979, so she
Right.
lived into her 80s. But her career ended with First Comes Courage in 1943, which I really, really hope if anyone's watching this movie, please put it out on disc because the YouTube version of this was not so great that I watched. It was probably worse than The Wild Party, despite being a little later. So thank you, Jason. This was so much fun. I love doing these series and exploring these films by these filmmakers. And just please check out the films of Dorothy Arzner. Thank you, Jason, for being on episode 600. And as always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. Thank you very much. Have a great day and great movies. Goodbye.